I never imagined that my own son, the boy I rocked in my arms through feverish nights, would one day stand before a judge accusing me of insanity just to seize control of my finances. I had spent my entire life saving every penny to secure our future, but I did not realize that the true danger was not losing money, but giving too much of it to those I loved. When I finally found the strength to defend my savings, I did not imagine it would cost me a son, but give me a new love at 72 years old. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel Grandma's Revenge Tales and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. Looking back at 70 is like looking at a photo album with pages worn by time. Some images remain sharp and vibrant while others have faded, leaving only the outlines of what once was. My name is Grace, and for 42 years I was a math teacher at a public school in Chicago. My husband John passed away when our only son Michael was just 13. A brain aneurysm, sudden, devastating, final. Overnight I became the sole provider, the only compass for our son. The years that followed were defined by strict discipline, not just for Michael, but mostly for myself. I learned to live with less to save more. I turned down dinner invitations, gave up the habit of buying new clothes, and took on extra tutoring classes on Saturdays. Everything was to ensure Michael had access to the best education possible, so he would never feel his father's absence reflected in material wants. Our two-bedroom apartment, which John and I had bought when I found out I was pregnant, became our sanctuary. It was small but cozy, with a balcony where I grew a garden of violets, John's favorite flowers. Michael grew up just as I had hoped, studious, disciplined, respectful. He graduated with a degree in civil engineering from a state university and landed a job at a respectable construction firm right after graduation. By 28, he already had his own condo, for which I contributed half of the down payment without hesitation. Seeing my son established and independent was the realization of the dream John and I had shared. When I retired at 65, I had a comfortable nest egg of $250,000, the result of 4 decades of silent sacrifices. It was not a fortune, but it represented security for my golden years, as I like to call this phase. It was enough to live modestly, cover potential medical expenses, and perhaps fulfill a few small postponed dreams, like visiting Hawaii. It was around that time that Michael met Sarah. He brought her over for Sunday lunch, a tradition we kept religiously. She walked into my apartment like someone appraising a property for sale, her attentive eyes cataloging every detail, from the lace curtains I had sewn myself to the picture frames on the mantel. Her blonde hair was impeccably straight, her nails long and red, and she wore high heels even for a casual lunch. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Mrs. Grace, it is a pleasure to finally meet you. Michael talks about you so much." She said this while extending a hand with a surprisingly firm grip. I prepared pot roast, Michael's favorite dish, and throughout lunch, Sarah effusively praised everything. The food, the apartment, even my porcelain set that I had inherited from my mother. Michael watched her with an expression I recognized immediately: blind admiration, the kind of look that does not see beyond the surface. "Sarah works at a boutique on the Magnificent Mile," Michael commented proudly. "Mom, she knows all the trends." "How interesting," I replied, serving him more potatoes. "Do you like your job?" "I love fashion," she said, adjusting her hair. "But it is only temporary. I am planning to open my own business soon." "What kind of business?" "An exclusive imported clothing store," she replied promptly. "There's a growing market for that here in the city. Women are tired of the same options in department stores." Michael nodded enthusiastically, as if he had already heard this detailed plan countless times. I realized in that moment that my son, usually so meticulous in professional matters, seemed to have suspended all critical sense when it came to Sarah. The Sunday gatherings continued, and little by little, Sarah became part of the routine. She always arrived with small gifts: A cake bought from an expensive bakery, exotic flowers that must have cost 3 times as much as my violets, a silk scarf that perfectly matched my eyes, calculated gestures that Michael interpreted as demonstrations of genuine affection. The wedding came 6 months later, a ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, a venue that cost 1/3 of my savings. Michael insisted on splitting the costs with me, claiming that mother and son should share this special moment. I, having dreamed of this day since I rocked Michael in my arms, agreed without hesitation. I wanted to see him happy, fulfilled, following his path. The first request for financial help came 2 months after the wedding. A Sunday like any other, except for the fact that Michael arrived alone, explaining that Sarah had a migraine. "Mom," he began as we drank coffee on the balcony among my violets, "we are thinking of remodeling the kitchen in the condo. Nothing too extravagant, just replacing the cabinets and appliances." "That is great, son. A new kitchen for your new life." "Yeah," he continued, avoiding my gaze. "It is just that something unexpected came up at work. A project got postponed, and my bonus got pushed back too." I immediately realized where this conversation was going. "Do you need a loan?" I asked directly. "It is not exactly a loan, Mom. It is more like help, $15,000. I will pay you back as soon as I get the bonus, I promise." $15,000. A significant chunk of my savings for a kitchen remodel that was already in perfect condition. I had visited his apartment the week before and had not noticed anything justifying an urgent renovation. "Of course, son. I will transfer it to you tomorrow." Michael smiled with relief, as if he had carried a huge weight all the way there and could finally set it down. We talked about other things, but I noticed he was more relaxed, as if the true purpose of that visit had been fulfilled. The money was transferred, the bonus was never mentioned again, and the alleged kitchen remodel turned into a trip to Paris. I discovered this weeks later when Sarah posted photos on social media showing off new clothes in front of French tourist spots. That was just the beginning. The requests became regular, always accompanied by elaborate justifications and promises of repayment that never materialized. $5,000 for a specialized course Michael needed to take, $8,000 for car repairs after an alleged accident, $12,000 to help with the down payment on a new car for Sarah because the old one was not safe enough. In less than a year, nearly $94,000 had left my account. I, who had spent 4 decades saving every penny, saw my reserves shrinking without a single dime coming back. Still, I could not say no. He was my son, my only son. How could I deny him help when he said he needed it? Then, one afternoon in May, I received a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Grace Davis?" asked a female voice on the other end of the line. "Yes, this is she." "We are calling from Meridian Bank. We are verifying an unusual transaction on your credit card. Did you authorize a purchase of $3,500 at Diamond's Jewelers?" My heart raced. I had not made such a purchase. I had not even visited a jewelry store in years. "No," I replied with a trembling voice. "I did not authorize that purchase." "In that case, we will block the transaction and your card. You will need to come to a branch to request a new one." When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. There was only one possible explanation. Someone had used my card without my permission, and that person could only be Michael or Sarah. My own card, which I had lent to Michael 2 weeks earlier for a work emergency, a dinner with important clients he needed to pay for because his card was maxed out. It was a Wednesday, and I had to wait until Sunday to confront them in person. Those were the longest days of my life since John passed away. The feeling of betrayal was physical, a constant weight in my chest, an ache that would not subside. I could not sleep well, lost my appetite, and my violets went without water for the first time in years. Sunday arrived, and with it, Michael and Sarah for the traditional lunch. She was wearing a new necklace, white gold with small inlaid diamonds. I recognized the style immediately from Diamond's Jewelers, where John had bought my wedding ring decades ago. I placed the credit card statement on the table before I even served lunch. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the turbulence in my chest. Michael blinked, confused. Sarah immediately touched her necklace, an automatic and revealing gesture. "About what, Mom?" "About a purchase of $3,500 at Diamond's Jewelers that I did not make." The silence that followed was more revealing than any confession. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice artificially soft. "Grace, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Michael wanted to give you a surprise for your birthday. The necklace was going to be a gift. My birthday is in October. It was May." "With my own money?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. Michael finally spoke, running his hand through his hair, a gesture he had done since he was a boy when caught in a lie. "Mom, we were going to pay it back. It is just that this opportunity came up, this exclusive necklace, and I thought you would look beautiful in it. I thought you would be happy." I looked at the necklace on Sarah's neck, her perfectly manicured nails, the Italian designer bag resting on the sofa. Then I looked at my son, at this stranger wearing Michael's face. "Why is the necklace on her neck?" Michael swallowed hard, searching for words. Sarah intervened again, now with a less conciliatory tone. "I just tried it on to see how it looked. The size is almost the same as yours." The lie was so transparent I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I felt something harden inside me, a resolve I did not know I still possessed. "I want my card back, now." "Mom, let's talk calmly," Michael tried, extending his hand over the table. "We are family. Families help each other." "The card," I repeated, extending my hand. Sarah opened her Italian bag and pulled out my card, slapping it onto the table with a sharp movement. "I never thought you would be so petty," she said, the words coming out like venom. "After everything we did for you." "Everything you did for me?" I repeated in disbelief. "What exactly did you do for me besides spend my money?" "We spent time with you," Sarah exclaimed, as if that were extraordinary generosity. "We came here every Sunday when we could be traveling, going out with friends, living our lives." Michael, who until then seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, suddenly adopted a defensive posture. "Mom, you are being unfair. We have always been attentive. We have always taken care of you." "You took care of me by using my card without authorization?" "It was a slip-up," he insisted. "A momentary mistake. We were going to replace it." Just like they replaced the $15,000 for the kitchen remodel that turned into a trip to Paris, or the $12,000 for the car Sarah needed urgently, or the $8,000 for the alleged accident. From the look on Michael's face, I realized he did not expect me to have noticed the lies. Maybe he thought I was too naive, too distracted, or simply too desperate for his presence in my life to question his stories. "Have you been tracking our spending?" asked Sarah, indignant. "Is that not an invasion of privacy?" "It is my money," I replied calmly. "It is not an invasion to check where my money goes." Michael stood up abruptly, dragging his chair across the wooden floor. "I think it is better if we leave. You are clearly not in a condition to have a rational conversation." That phrase, "not in a condition to have a rational conversation," set off an alarm in my mind. It was exactly the kind of language used to invalidate the elderly, to suggest they are no longer in full control of their faculties. "I am perfectly rational, Michael, rational enough to know that you lied to me repeatedly to get money." "You are paranoid," declared Sarah, grabbing her bag. "Michael, I told you this would happen. Your mom is becoming senile." Senile. The word floated in the room like a veiled threat. "Let's go, honey," said Michael, taking Sarah's arm. At the door, he turned back. "When you are calmer, we can talk. We love you, Mom, but we cannot accept this kind of accusation." The door closed, and I was left alone with my tumultuous thoughts and the terrible suspicion that this was only the beginning of something worse. In the following days, I heard nothing from them. The next Sunday came and went without the traditional lunch. I called Michael on Monday, but the call went to voicemail. I sent messages that were read but not answered. Their silence was more disturbing than any confrontation. I decided to take measures to protect what remained of my savings. I went to the bank and requested detailed statements for the last 18 months. The manager, a middle-aged man who had known me for years, frowned as he checked my account. "Mrs. Davis, are you aware that there are 3 additional cards linked to your account?" My stomach dropped. 3 cards? I only requested 1. "Well, according to our system, you authorized the issuance of additional cards for Michael Davis and Sarah Davis. There is also a 3rd card in the name of, let me check, Jessica Miller." Jessica Miller. I did not know anyone by that name. "I never authorized those cards," I said, my voice shaking. "Never?" The manager adopted a grave expression. "In that case, Mrs. Davis, we need to file a fraud report." I left the bank feeling simultaneously deceived and determined. Before filing the report, I decided to confront Michael directly. I went to his condo without warning. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, and I did not expect to find them at home, but I needed to see the place with my own eyes, to understand how they lived while draining my savings. To my surprise, Sarah answered the door. She was wearing expensive sportswear and looked like she had just come from a workout. Her face showed surprise at seeing me. "Grace, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk about the 3 additional credit cards linked to my account." She hesitated for a second. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in. Michael isn't here, but we can talk." The apartment had transformed since my last visit. New furniture, a gigantic television on the wall, pieces of art I had never seen. The kitchen, which supposedly needed remodeling, now boasted state-of-the-art appliances and Italian marble countertops. "Did you like the remodel?" asked Sarah, noticing my gaze. There was a challenge in her voice, as if saying, "Yes, we spent your money on this. So what?" "Who is Jessica Miller?" I asked directly. Sarah sat on the white leather sofa, crossing her legs. "My cousin. She needed temporary help, and since you have always been so generous, you opened a credit card in my name for your cousin." "It was Michael who suggested it," she replied promptly, shifting the blame. "He said you wouldn't mind since you always want to help family." Family. The word they used as a shield, as a justification for any predatory behavior. "I want all the cards, now." Sarah laughed, a cold sound I had never heard from her before. "I don't have them all here. Michael takes his to work and Jessica has hers. So give me yours." "I have no obligation to do that," she replied defiantly. "Michael is your son. The cards are in his name." "They are in my name," I corrected, "and the money is mine." She stood up, suddenly irritated. "Do you know what your problem is, Grace? You think saved money has value. It does not. Money is meant to be used, enjoyed. Why did you spend your life saving? To die with a full bank account? We are living the life you never had the courage to live." Her words hit me like a slap, not because of the cruelty, but because of the crystal clear revelation of how she, and apparently Michael, saw me. A foolish old woman whose only utility was to finance the life they believed they deserved. "I am going to report you for fraud," I said, standing up. "All of you." "Do it," challenged Sarah, stepping so close I could smell her expensive perfume, probably also bought with my money. "Let's see if you have the courage to send your only son to prison. And even if you do, who do you think a judge is going to believe? Us, a young, well-established couple, or a confused old lady who is changing her mind about gifts she gave her family?" The threat was clear. Not only was my money at stake, but my credibility, my autonomy, my dignity. I left the apartment with trembling legs and a heavy heart, but with a newfound certainty. This was no longer about money. It was about my life, my independence, and I would fight with everything I had to protect them. The way home that day was a blur. I barely remember how I arrived, only the suffocating weight of betrayal and fear alternating in my chest. When I entered my apartment, everything seemed strange, as if it belonged to another life, another Grace. The violets on the balcony, the picture frames with photos of Michael as a child, John's favorite armchair, everything seemed like a cruel reminder of a family that no longer existed. I sat at the kitchen table and did something I had never done. I listed every cent Michael and Sarah had taken from me in the last 18 months. The unreturned loans, the unauthorized purchases, the transfers for emergencies that were never explained. In the end, the number left me breathless. $94,000, more than a third of everything I had saved in 4 decades of work. That night, I could not sleep. Sarah's words echoed in my mind like a sentence. Who do you think a judge is going to believe? Us or a confused old lady? And was she right? Was that how the world saw me now? An old, confused woman whose words carried less weight than those of younger people? The next morning, I made a decision. I called my friend Lucy, who had retired with me from the school where we taught. She had always been the most assertive of us, the one who was not afraid of confrontation. "Lucy," I said as soon as she answered, "I need your help. Do you know a trustworthy lawyer?" "A lawyer? Grace, what happened?" I told her everything, omitting no details, the lies, the fraudulent cards, the veiled threat. "My God," she murmured when I finished. "And you still have doubts about reporting them?" "He is my son, Lucy, my only son." "No, Grace," she replied firmly. "That man is no longer the boy you raised. I know someone who can help you. My nephew Richard is a lawyer specializing in elder rights. I will give you his number." Lucy not only gave me the number, but insisted on accompanying me to Richard's office the next day. He was a man in his 40s, with kind eyes behind discreet glasses and a calm way of speaking that immediately inspired confidence. "Mrs. Davis," he said after listening to my story, "what you are describing is a classic case of elder financial abuse. Unfortunately, it is much more common than people imagine, especially when the perpetrators are family members." "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We have several options. First, we need to immediately block all cards linked to your account and check if there are other accounts or loans in your name that you are unaware of. Second, we can file a civil lawsuit to recover the funds. Third, there is the possibility of criminal charges for fraud and theft." Criminal? The word sounded heavy, final. That would mean my son and his wife could face legal consequences. "Yes," Richard confirmed gently, "but that decision depends entirely on you. Some people prefer to simply recover the money and cut ties without involving the criminal justice system." I thought of Michael as a child, learning to walk, holding on to my fingers with his chubby little hands. I thought of him as a teenager, proud to show me his report card with perfect grades. I thought of the young man who cried when receiving his college diploma, dedicating the achievement to me and his father's memory. Then I thought of the man who allowed strangers to open credit cards in my name, who used the memory of our family bonds to manipulate me, who was willing to make me look senile to keep accessing my money. I just want my money back, I decided, and I want them out of my life. Richard nodded, understanding. "We will focus on the recovery of the assets then. But you must be prepared, Mrs. Davis. They will not make it easy. People who commit this type of abuse rarely admit what they did. They will likely try to turn it against you somehow." "How so?" "It is a common tactic. When confronted, financial abusers often claim the victim is confused, that she gave permission and forgot, or even that she is being manipulated by third parties. In extreme cases, I have seen perpetrators try to obtain legal guardianship over the victim's finances, alleging mental incapacity." A chill ran down my spine. It was exactly what Sarah had hinted at. "And can they succeed?" "Not easily. Not without substantial evidence of incapacity. and from what I see, you are in full control of your faculties. But it is important that we are prepared for all possibilities. In the following days, I entered a strange state of permanent alert. Richard helped me block all cards and accounts, check my name with credit bureaus, and prepare the documentation for the lawsuit. Lucy practically moved into my apartment, refusing to leave me alone, especially after we received news that Michael had tried to make withdrawals from my savings account, now protected by new passwords and restrictions. The first retaliation came a week later, in the form of a call from a psychologist claiming to have been hired by my son. Concerned about my recent episodes of confusion and paranoia, the man spoke with practiced condescension, as if talking to a child. "Mrs. Davis, your son is very worried. He informed me that you have been making unfounded accusations, that you are suspicious of people close to you, that you believe they are stealing your money. These are classic symptoms of early dementia." I hung up the phone without answering. 10 minutes later, Richard called me. "Mrs. Davis, I just received a call from a lawyer representing your son. They are indicating that they will file a request for guardianship, alleging that you are no longer fit to manage your finances." Guardianship. The word fell like a sentence. They were really willing to declare me legally incompetent to keep access to my money. "What do we do now?" I asked, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Now we act preventively. I will request independent medical and neuropsychological evaluations to certify your full capacity. We will carefully document all attempts at intimidation and accelerate our process against them." In the following weeks, I went through a battery of exams. Neurologists, psychologists, geriatricians, all certified that I was in perfect control of my faculties, with no sign of cognitive decline that would justify any kind of legal intervention. Each certificate, each report, was a small victory, a confirmation of what I already knew. There was nothing wrong with me other than the naive trust I placed in my own son. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. Neighbors informed me that Michael and Sarah had gone through the building, talking to residents about my worrying mental state. One of the retired teachers who had worked with me received a call from them asking her to testify about behavior changes she had noticed in me in recent years. The principal of the school where I had taught for 40 years called me, concerned. "Grace, your son was here asking if you already showed signs of confusion before you retired. He said he is worried about your mental health. What is going on?" I had to explain everything to her, feeling the bitterness of humiliation with every word. The principal, outraged, assured me that no one from the school would collaborate with what she called a blatant attempt at defamation. The request for guardianship was formally presented 3 weeks later. I received the official notification on a sunny Thursday in August, delivered by an embarrassed process server. The document, cold and bureaucratic, alleged that I showed clear signs of cognitive decline, erratic behavior, pathological distrust, and inability to properly manage financial resources. The request cited as evidence my unfounded accusations against my son and daughter-in-law, my recent obsession with money, and reports from third parties about changes in my behavior. The most shocking part was the name listed as the primary applicant, Michael Davis, my son, the boy I had raised alone, to whom I had dedicated every drop of my sweat, every extra minute of work, every silent sacrifice. Richard reacted with professional efficiency, but I could see the indignation in his eyes when he came to my apartment that same evening to discuss our strategy. "Mrs. Davis, do not worry. This request has no basis. We have all the medical reports certifying your full mental capacity. What they are attempting to do is extremely serious and unethical. In fact, it can backfire on them." "How so?" "We are accumulating solid evidence that this guardianship request is, in reality, a deliberate attempt to gain control over your resources after you cut off their access. This constitutes procedural bad faith and can result in legal consequences for your son and his wife." Still, fear settled in me like a parasite. What if the judge believed them? What if I lost not only my money, but my autonomy? I, who had run a household alone for decades, who had educated a son, who had taken care of classes of 40 students for years, to be declared incapable of taking care of myself. The days leading up to the hearing were a whirlwind. Lucy practically moved into my apartment, refusing to leave me alone. Other retired colleagues formed a kind of protective network around me, taking turns with visits, phone calls, accompanying me on necessary outings. It was as if a whole silent community of older women had recognized in that situation something familiar, something that could happen to any of them. One afternoon, while we were waiting for the hearing, I received a visit from a former student who now worked at the same bank where I had my account. Jessica Miller had been a shy girl who blossomed in math class, discovering a talent that led her to study accounting. Now she was a branch manager downtown. "Mrs. Grace," she said, sitting in my living room, "I came because I found out what is happening and I thought this might help." She placed a folder on the table. "Here are copies of all transactions made with your cards in the last 2 years, including location, date, time, and in some cases, even images from the security cameras of the establishments." I flipped through the documents, feeling a mixture of gratitude and horror. It was all there. Withdrawals made at 3 a.m. at ATMs across town. Simultaneous purchases in different stores, proving that more than one person was using my cards. Transactions at expensive restaurants on days when I was provably at home, attested by call logs from my landline. "Jessica, how did you get this?" Let's just say I have friends in various departments at the bank, and they all remember the teacher who never gave up on them, even when they were failing math. She smiled. "What your son is trying to do is wrong, Mrs. Grace. We are not going to let that happen." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in September at the county courthouse. I put on my best clothes, a navy blue suit I used for special occasions, and let Lucy fix my hair. I wanted to look exactly like who I was, a 70-year-old woman who was perfectly capable, dignified, and self-sufficient. The courtroom was full of people I did not expect to see. Former colleagues from school, old neighbors, even some former students who had grown up and become responsible adults. They all came to support me, to testify to my lucidity, to form a human wall against the attempt to strip me of my autonomy. When Michael entered, accompanied by Sarah and their lawyer, the look of surprise on his face at seeing the full room was priceless. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw a flash of shame on his face before he looked away. Sarah, on the other hand, held her chin high, defiant, as if she were absolutely convinced of her position. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a neutral expression, analyzed the documents presented by both parties before speaking. "We are here to evaluate the request for partial guardianship of Grace Davis, 70 years old, filed by her son, Michael Davis, who alleges the defendant's progressive inability to manage her assets and financial resources." She then turned directly to me. "Mrs. Davis, do you understand the purpose of this hearing?" "Perfectly, Your Honor," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "My son is trying to declare me incompetent to manage my own money because I blocked his access to my account after discovering that he and his wife had been using my cards without my authorization." The judge nodded and turned to Michael. "Mr. Davis, what motivated you to request guardianship of your mother?" Michael glanced quickly at his lawyer before answering, his voice trained to sound concerned. "Your Honor, my mother has shown worrying behaviors in recent months. Confusion, paranoia, unfounded accusations against family members. She believes we are stealing her money when in reality we have always used resources with her full knowledge and authorization. And did you authorize your son and daughter-in-law to use your credit cards?" the judge asked me. "I authorized specific loans with defined amounts and purposes, which were never paid back," I clarified. I never authorized the unrestricted use of my cards, and certainly not the opening of additional cards in my name. That was when Richard presented the folder with the documents provided by Jessica. The judge examined the evidence carefully, the detailed statements, the simultaneous purchases in different places, the late-night withdrawals, the transactions made while I was provably elsewhere. "Mr. Davis," she said finally, "how do you explain these simultaneous transactions in different locations, or these withdrawals made at 3 a.m. at ATMs across town when your mother was provably at home?" Michael went pale. His lawyer tried to intervene, claiming the documents had not been obtained through proper channels, but the judge interrupted him. "The question here is not the admissibility of this evidence in a criminal trial, but whether there are grounds to declare Mrs. Davis incompetent. And what I am seeing strongly suggests that she is not only perfectly lucid, but is being a victim of financial abuse." The hearing continued with testimonies from doctors and specialists who had evaluated me, all certifying my full mental capacity. Former colleagues and even former students testified to my clarity, my competence as a teacher, my management skills. The decisive moment came when the judge asked me to demonstrate my knowledge of my own financial situation. "Mrs. Davis, could you detail your current financial situation, your resources, monthly expenses, plans for the future?" I answered with precision. I listed the exact value of my pension, my savings before and after the unauthorized withdrawals, my monthly expenses for food, health, apartment maintenance, taxes. I explained how I had planned my finances to ensure independence in old age, how I had created an emergency fund for unforeseen medical expenses, how I managed my resources to live comfortably within my means. As I spoke, I noticed the judge's expression softening. It was not pity, it was respect. At the end of my testimony, she nodded slightly. "Mrs. Davis, the court is convinced of your full capacity to manage your life and your finances. The request for guardianship is denied." She then turned to Michael, her expression now stern. "Mr. Davis, I consider this request not only unfounded, but potentially malicious. There is substantial evidence suggesting that you and your wife may have committed financial fraud against your mother. I strongly recommend that you seek a resolution regarding the misappropriated funds, as the court will be forwarding this evidence to the district attorney's office to evaluate the appropriateness of criminal charges." When we left the room, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had won, my autonomy was preserved, but at a devastating cost. The relationship with my son, which I had nurtured for 40 years, was irretrievably destroyed. I looked at him one last time before leaving the courthouse, searching for some trace of the boy I had once rocked in my arms, but I only found the hard gaze of a stranger. Legal victories rarely bring the satisfaction we imagine. While friends and supporters congratulated me on the courthouse steps, I only felt a growing emptiness where the certainty of unconditional love once existed. The judge had confirmed my sanity, my capacity, my rights. But nothing could restore broken trust or erase the image of my son trying to declare me incompetent to access my money. In the following days, I tried to return to normal. I watered my violets. I graded papers for the tutoring I still did for some students on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I participated in book club meetings at the public library, everyday activities that used to give me pleasure but which I now performed mechanically, like someone following a script to pretend that life goes on. Lucy remained by my side like a tireless sentry, showing up with homemade cakes, suggesting walks, filling the silence with conversations about everything except Michael. Other friends took turns visiting, as if they feared that if left alone, I might crumble under the weight of betrayal. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the hearing, while I was grading papers at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. It was Renee, the neighbor from apartment 302, a reserved woman who rarely participated in elevator conversations. "Mrs. Davis," she said, nervously twisting the handles of her purse. "Can I come in? I need to tell you something." I invited her to sit down and offered coffee, which she declined with an impatient gesture. I came because I should have done this sooner. Maybe I could have avoided everything you went through. What are you talking about, Renee? She took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage. Your son and daughter-in-law came to see me a month ago. They wanted me to testify at the hearing, to say that I had seen you talking to yourself, appearing confused, leaving the house in inappropriate clothes. I felt a lump in my throat. And what did you tell them? I told them it was a lie, that I never saw any of that, that you have always been perfectly lucid, organized, independent. She lowered her gaze. Then they offered me money, $5,000 for me to invent stories about your behavior. My hands started trembling slightly. Did you accept? No. She seemed genuinely offended. Of course not. I told them I wouldn't lie to harm anyone for $50,000, especially a neighbor who has always been kind to me. But, she hesitated, they went to other residents in the building, and some people accepted. Who? I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. The doorman, for starters. He is new to the building. He doesn't know you well. The couple in 107, too. They barely talk to anyone. I doubt they even know who you are. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to assimilate this new layer of betrayal. Michael had not only tried to declare me incompetent, he had tried to buy witnesses to strengthen his case. Why are you telling me this now, Renee? Because I can't stop thinking that if I had reported it sooner, maybe I could have prevented all of this, and because I think you deserve to know the extent of what they tried to do. After she left, I sat at the table with the forgotten papers in front of me. I thought of all the times I had made Michael's favorite dish, how I had saved to give him the best education possible, how I had celebrated every one of his achievements as if they were mine. And I thought about how, in the end, none of that mattered when he saw an opportunity to get his hands on my money. I called Richard and told him what Renee had told me. He took notes, promised to investigate, and mentioned the possibility of escalating the charges against Michael and Sarah. Technical words, legal procedures, all sounding distant, unable to touch the real wound. "What do you really want, Mrs. Davis?" he asked finally, his voice softening. "Do you want to take this to the full extent of the law? Do you just want your money back? Or do you want to attempt some kind of reconciliation?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Their punishment? My money back? Or just my son? Not the man he had become, but the boy he had been. "I want it to end," I answered finally. "I want to be able to move on without constantly looking over my shoulder, fearing the next attack. I want my money back, but more than that, I want peace." Richard nodded, understanding. "We will propose a settlement then. They return everything they took improperly, sign a document committing never to attempt access to your finances again, and in exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges." Will they accept? Probably. The alternative would be facing a criminal trial with substantial evidence against them. Even an inexperienced lawyer would recommend accepting the deal. The settlement was proposed and, as Richard had predicted, quickly accepted. Michael and Sarah committed to returning the $94,000 in monthly installments over 3 years, with interest. They signed legal documents waiving any claim on my finances and agreed to keep their distance, with no direct contact unless initiated by me. Within a few months, my financial life began to stabilize. The installments arrived on time, although I suspected this was due more to fear of legal consequences than any sense of responsibility. My apartment had been equipped with new locks and a security system, courtesy of former students who now worked at a tech company. My bank accounts were protected by new security protocols that Jessica had helped me implement. Externally, everything seemed resolved, organized, controlled. But internally, I struggled with a deep and confusing grief. Grief for someone who was still alive, but who had died to me in every way that mattered. On lonely nights, I rummaged through boxes of old photographs, tracing the outline of Michael's face as a child with my fingers, trying to understand at what moment I had lost that boy. Had it been my fault? Was I overly indulgent or too strict? Had I unconsciously transmitted some message that money was more important than principles? One afternoon, while watering my violets on the balcony, I noticed that one of them, the oldest one, which had been a gift from John, was dying. The leaves, once vibrant, were withered and yellowing. I checked the soil, seeing if it was too dry or soaked. I looked for signs of pests. I moved the pot to get more light. But something told me it was too late. The plant had spent too much time in unsuitable conditions and was now beyond the point of recovery. Watching that dying violet, I felt a strange identification. I, too, had spent too much time in a toxic situation, allowing them to drain my vital energy, my resources, my trust. The difference was that somehow I had found the strength to walk away before it was too late. The plant did not have that choice. I realized, telling this story, that I speak of Michael and Sarah as if they were villains in a simple tale. But life is rarely that clear. There were moments in the quiet hours of dawn when I wondered if Sarah had manipulated Michael as skillfully as they had tried to manipulate me. If my son, somewhere inside that stranger who had tried to rob me, was still the boy I had raised to be honest and good. But those reflections led nowhere but to more pain. I learned little by little not to dig too deep into memories, not to question every step of how we got to that point. The past was a maze where it was easy to get lost. I needed to keep my eyes on the road ahead. It was Lucy who finally pulled me out of the state of lethargy I had settled into. One Saturday afternoon, she showed up at my door with a determined expression I knew well. "Grace, get dressed. We are going out." "Going out? Where?" "To the university. There is a lecture on contemporary literature starting in an hour. Then we are going to have dinner at that Italian restaurant on Michigan Avenue you like so much." "Lucy, I am not in the mood to—" "That is exactly why we are going," she interrupted me, already opening my closet and choosing clothes. "You have been locked in this apartment for too long, ruminating on what happened. Life goes on, Grace, and living well is the best revenge you can have against those who tried to belittle you." Reluctantly, I let her drag me out. The lecture, given by an enthusiastic young professor, was surprisingly captivating. Dinner afterward, with glasses of wine and conversations that had nothing to do with Michael, Sarah, or lawsuits, was like breathing fresh air after months in a closed room. Upon returning home, I noticed something I hadn't perceived in my absence. My apartment smelled musty, like curtains that weren't opened often, like a suspended life. I decided there, in that moment, that I would not allow Michael's betrayal to define the rest of my life. The next morning, I opened all the windows, letting the October light enter without restriction. I separated clothes I no longer wore to donate, rearranged books, cleaned surfaces I had neglected. Small gestures of care for my space that were, in reality, gestures of care for myself. And it was during that cleaning that I found, in the back of a drawer, a card John had given me on our last wedding anniversary, just 3 months before he died. Inside, in his angular handwriting, he had written, "For Grace, who always finds light even on the darkest days. Your heart is stronger than you imagine." The words, written 2 decades earlier, seemed present, urgent, as if John had somehow foreseen that I would need them exactly in that moment. I cried then, not the contained crying that had accompanied me in recent months, but deep sobs that seemed to come from the center of my being. I cried for John, for Michael, for myself, for everything I had lost and for what I still needed to find. When the tears finally dried, I felt something I didn't expect, lightness, as if the crying had washed away not only the pain of the recent betrayal, but layers of accumulated sadness I didn't even know I was carrying. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, without the nightmares that had become constant companions. The next day, I woke up with a clarity I had forgotten was possible. It was time to start over. not just survive what had happened, but really live again. I was 70 years old in reasonable health, with a sharp mind, loyal friends, and financial resources that, although reduced, would still allow me to live comfortably. I had more than many people would ever have, and it would be a form of ingratitude not to take advantage of those gifts. I started with small changes. I signed up for a digital photography course at the community college, something I had always wanted to do, but never found time for. I resumed my participation in the local church choir, which I had abandoned after John's death because singing without him seemed wrong. I accepted Jessica's invitation to give occasional lectures on financial literacy at her bank, an irony that was not lost on me considering my recent experience. Each new activity, each new relationship, was a small affirmation that my story was not over, that there were still chapters to be written that did not include Michael or the pain he had caused. Time is a strange doctor. It doesn't completely heal all wounds, as cliches say, but it transforms them into something we can live with. The sharp pain of Michael's betrayal gradually transformed into a chronic sadness, always present, but no longer paralyzing. A part of me still startled when the phone rang, fearing it was him with some new demand or threat. Another part secretly hoped he would call to ask for forgiveness, to say he had understood the gravity of what he had done. None of those calls came. The settlement installments continued arriving punctually in my account, cold and impersonal bank transfers that were the only remaining vestige that we once had a relationship. Sometimes I wondered how Michael explained those monthly payments to himself. Were they, in his distorted mind, a form of extortion of which he was a victim? Or were there moments of clarity when he recognized the harm he had caused? Those unanswered questions began losing importance as my life filled with new experiences. The photography course turned out to be an unexpected passion. I discovered I had an eye for composition, for capturing moments others didn't notice. I began documenting my neighborhood, the faces of local shopkeepers, the subtle changes in the seasons seen through the same windows day after day. The lectures on financial literacy at Jessica's bank evolved into a more structured program. Finance for Seniors, we called it. I shared basic principles of economics, household budgeting, retirement planning, but I also warned about the signs of family financial abuse, using my own experience, without names, as a case study. When someone you love starts talking about our money when referring to your money, pay attention, I told the participants, mostly women between 60 and 70. When loans are requested for emergencies that are never fully explained, when promises of repayment are made and broken repeatedly, when you start feeling guilty for questioning where your money goes, those are alerts that cannot be ignored. The looks of recognition on many faces told me my story was not unique. The shame and silence surrounding elder financial abuse, especially when perpetrated by family members, create the illusion of isolated cases, when in reality, it is a silent epidemic. It was after one of those lectures, almost a year after the trial, that I met Gabriel. He was a 74-year-old gentleman, a widower for 5 years, who had attended my presentation with special attention. When the Q&A session ended, he waited for everyone to disperse before approaching. "Your lecture moved me deeply," he said, extending his hand. "Gabriel Miller." "Grace Davis," I replied, noticing his kind brown eyes and the calm way he spoke. "I am glad it was helpful." "More than helpful. Revealing." He hesitated for a moment. "I went through something very similar with my youngest son. I didn't reach the point of a lawsuit, but almost." There was an understanding in his eyes that disarmed me, the shared knowledge of a specific pain that few could fully understand. "It is hard to talk about it," I observed. "The shame. The shame is what keeps us isolated," he completed, "and isolation is what allows the abuse to continue." I accepted his invitation for coffee. We talked for hours, not just about our painful experiences with our children, but about books, music, places we had visited, dreams we still had. Gabriel had been a university history professor, was passionate about jazz, cooked the best mushroom risotto in the city, according to himself, and had an elderly dog named Kafka. Because of the writer? I asked. Actually, because as a puppy, he would stare at walls as if seeing something incomprehensible and slightly threatening, he replied, laughing. It seemed appropriate. At the end of that afternoon, we exchanged phone numbers with the vague promise of keeping in touch. I didn't think much of it afterward. Casual encounters happen and rarely lead to anything meaningful, especially at our age. To my surprise, Gabriel called the next day, inviting me to a jazz concert at a club downtown over the weekend. I accepted, more out of curiosity than anything else. I hadn't been on a date in almost 30 years, since a few months after John's death, when well-meaning friends tried to reintroduce me to the market, an experience I had considered disastrous and had no desire to repeat. But Gabriel was different from the men I had met back then. There was no desperation in him, no hurry, no feeling that I should feel grateful for the attention. Just the quiet company of someone who understood the value of time, who knew how to appreciate small moments, who didn't see widowhood as a problem to be solved, but as a part of the history that had brought us there. The concert was followed by dinner, which led to more concerts, art exhibitions, walks in the park, long conversations in coffee shops. In Gabriel, I found something I didn't expect, a partner who didn't fill the space John had left, but created a completely new space, where I could be not just John's widow or Michael's mother, but simply Grace, a woman with thoughts, desires, fears, and hopes of her own. 6 months after our first meeting, Gabriel invited me to meet Kafka, his dog. He was a mutt, quite old now, with gray fur around his muzzle and a philosophical disposition that justified his name. We spent the afternoon in his cozy apartment full of books and vinyl records while he prepared the famous mushroom risotto. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Grace?" he asked while stirring the rice slowly. "Your resilience. You went through something that would have destroyed many people, but instead of shutting down, you transformed the experience into something that helps others." "It wasn't always like that," I admitted, looking at the glass of wine he had poured me. "In the first months, I could barely get out of bed. There were days I wondered if it was worth going on. Not in a drastic way, you understand, just that feeling of, what for? Who for? Why?" Gabriel nodded, understanding. "I know that feeling well. When Teresa died, I spent 6 months practically on autopilot. Kafka was the one who saved me, actually. An old dog needing regular walks, feeding at specific times. He gave me a purpose when I couldn't find one inside myself. Watching Gabriel cook with precise and calm movements, I realized how unexpected this new phase of my life was. At 71, after a devastating betrayal that should have made me bitter and distrustful, I was sitting in the kitchen of a man I had known for barely a year, feeling something that looked strangely like happiness. "What are you thinking?" asked Gabriel, noticing my silence. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is, how we can lose everything we considered safe and still, somehow, find new beginnings where we least expect them." He smiled, that kind smile that had become familiar in recent months. New beginnings. I like that. I think that is what we are doing, right? Starting something new. Our relationship evolved with the caution of two people who knew both the value of love and the cost of loss. There was no youthful urgency or traditional expectations of where a relationship should go. We were two complete individuals who chose to share parts of their lives without the pretense of filling each other's empty spaces. Gabriel introduced me to his small circle of friends, other retired professors, an amateur jazz group he played with occasionally, his younger sister and brother-in-law. I introduced him to Lucy, to Jessica, to my choir colleagues. Our lives began to intertwine in small daily gestures. Borrowed books, shared recipes, good morning messages, late-night calls just to say goodnight. "Do you think it is possible to love again after 70? I asked him one night as we walked through the park after an outdoor concert. Not in the same way as before, of course, but somehow? Gabriel stopped, looking at me with an intensity that made me blush like a teenager. I don't think it is possible to love the same way twice, at any age, he replied. Every love is unique because the people involved are unique and because the moment it happens is unique. But yes, I think we can love deeply at any age, maybe even more deeply after 70, because we carry an understanding of the preciousness of time that young people simply cannot have. He took my hand, a gesture that had become common between us, but in that moment seemed charged with new meaning. I am falling in love with you, Grace. I am not afraid to say it, and I have no expectations about what this means or where it needs to lead us. I just want you to know. The words floated in the night air, crystal clear and undeniable. A part of me wanted to retreat, to protect myself, the same part that still bled from Michael's betrayal, but another part, a part I thought had died long ago, responded with a certainty that surprised me. I am falling in love with you too, Gabriel, I replied, the words coming out easier than I expected. And that scares me a little. What scares you? Trusting again, believing that something good can last. After what happened with Michael? I am not your son, he said gently, and you are not my daughter. We are adults who have lived full lives, with mistakes and successes, losses and gains. We arrived at this point carrying our scars, but also our wisdom. We don't need to repeat the mistakes of the past. He was right, of course. The fear I felt wasn't really about Gabriel, but about my own judgment. I had trusted Michael completely. I had believed I knew him better than anyone in the world, and yet he had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. How could I trust myself to correctly assess another person's character? But I realized, looking at Gabriel under the soft light of the park lamps, that the risk of trusting again was less than the guaranteed cost of never allowing myself to feel again. Living locked in a fortress of distrust was not really living. I don't know what the future holds for us, I said finally, but I am willing to find out, one day at a time. Gabriel smiled, and in that moment he seemed younger than his 74 years. He leaned in and kissed me. Our first kiss, soft and full of promise, like the first chapter of a book we were both eager to keep reading. Our relationship blossomed in the following months, developing its own rhythm and routines. We alternated weekends between his apartment and mine. We discovered favorite restaurants, movies we both enjoyed, composers we listened to repeatedly. We had our first small arguments about politics, about the best way to make coffee, about whether it was worth getting up early to see the sunrise. I thought so. He preferred to sleep. We learned to accept our differences without trying to change each other. In many ways, it was a more mature and balanced relationship than any other I had experienced. Even with John, who had been a good husband, but a product of a generation where gender roles were more rigid. With Gabriel, there was a genuine partnership, a constant give and take, a deep respect for the other's individuality. A year after our first meeting, Gabriel surprised me with an unexpected proposal. I have been thinking, he said while we were having dinner at his apartment, with Kafka sleeping peacefully at our feet. We both live alone. We both have apartments bigger than we need. It makes economic, ecological, and emotional sense for us to consider living together. The suggestion caught me off guard. Living together at 72? It seemed like a youthful, almost impulsive decision, and yet it made perfect practical sense. Are you asking me to move in together? I asked, wanting to make sure we were on the same page. Yes, he confirmed. It doesn't have to be permanent if you don't feel comfortable. We can do a 3-month trial. If it doesn't work, we each go back to our apartment. No hard feelings. Where would we live? In your apartment or mine? In neither, actually. He seemed a little nervous. I was thinking we could look for a new place, something that would be ours, not mine or yours. A fresh start. The idea was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Abandoning the apartment where I had lived with John, where I had raised Michael, where every room held memories, some sweet, others painful. Starting in a new space without ghosts, without pre-existing stories. I think I would like that, I replied finally. A fresh start in a new place. But I have one condition. What is it? My violets come with me. All of them. Gabriel laughed, relieved. Your violets, my vinyl records, and Kafka, the essentials. In the following weeks, we visited several apartments looking for the right place. We wanted something on the ground floor or with a reliable elevator considering our ages. We needed space for my plants, for Gabriel's books, for a small piano he had inherited from his mother. We wanted a quiet neighborhood, but not isolated with essential services nearby. Finally, we found it. A 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park with a sunny balcony perfect for my violets. A spacious living room where Gabriel's piano would fit comfortably, and a park nearby where Kafka could walk. The neighborhood had everything we needed within walking distance. Pharmacy, supermarket, bakery, even a small cultural center with activities for seniors. We began planning the move, deciding what to take, what to donate, what to leave behind. It was an exercise in detachment and at the same time in redefinition. Every object we chose to keep had a meaning. Every item we decided to leave behind represented a release. It was during that organizing process that I found, in the back of a drawer, the last gift I had given Michael before everything fell apart. A watch that had belonged to John, which I had had restored for my son's 40th birthday. I held the watch in my hands, feeling its weight, listening to the steady tick-tock marking the passage of time. Time that did not return. That kept moving forward regardless of our losses and gains. "What are you going to do with that?" asked Gabriel gently, noticing the object in my hands and the expression on my face. For a moment, I considered keeping it, a last material link to the son I had lost. But then I realized I didn't need the watch to remember Michael or the good times we had shared before everything went wrong. Those memories were inside me, not in objects. I am going to donate it, I decided. Someone will be able to use it and appreciate it more than me. Gabriel nodded, understanding the meaning of that small gesture. It wasn't just a watch I was leaving behind, but a part of the grief I had carried for too long. The move happened on a Tuesday in April, almost 2 years after the court hearing that had officially ended my relationship with Michael. Friends came to help, Lucy supervising the movers with the efficiency of a general, Jessica organizing important documents, former students carrying boxes of books and delicately transporting my violets. When the last car was unloaded and the last helper said goodbye, Gabriel and I were left alone in our new home. A space full of boxes and furniture in temporary positions, but already pulsing with possibilities. "Welcome to our fresh start," said Gabriel, hugging me by the shoulders as we looked at the messy room. "Our fresh start," I repeated, savoring the words. Who knew that at 72 I would be starting a new life? "Who said there is an age to start over?" he replied, kissing my forehead. "As long as there is a tomorrow, there is the possibility of a new beginning." That night, we slept in our new bedroom, on a makeshift bed, exhausted from the move but strangely energized. Through the window, we could see a starry sky that seemed to promise better days. I fell asleep thinking about how life moves in unexpected cycles, how we can lose everything and still find new treasures, how we can be hurt deeply and still discover the capacity to love again, how we can be betrayed by those we trust most and still learn to trust again. Michael's betrayal had been the deepest wound of my life, but paradoxically, it had also been the catalyst that pushed me toward this new existence, an existence that, at 72, seemed richer in possibilities than I could have ever imagined. Seasons followed one another, and with them our life together developed its own rhythms. The apartment in Lincoln Park, initially just a space with potential, truly transformed into our home. The balcony became a small urban garden. With my violets blooming alongside aromatic herbs, Gabriel grew for his culinary experiments. The living room, with the restored piano taking pride of place, became our sanctuary, him playing jazz pieces softly while I read or organized recent photographs. We established new traditions, extended breakfast on Sundays with classical music in the background, movie nights at home on Fridays with old films we both loved, a monthly dinner with close friends where everyone brought a dish and shared stories until late. Our routine as a couple developed naturally, without the friction that often accompanies younger couples. Maybe it was age, maybe the experience of previous relationships, but there was a fluidity between us that surprised me, as if we had met decades ago, not just a few years. I think the secret is that we are not trying to change each other, Gabriel observed one night as we washed dishes side by side. When we are young, we think loving someone means molding them into our ideal image. At our age, we understand that loving is accepting the other exactly as they are. I smiled, handing him a wet plate to dry. It also helps that we have nothing left to prove. We aren't building careers, raising children, or trying to impress anyone, except each other occasionally. He winked at me, making me laugh. Our sex life, another aspect many assume disappears with age, found its own expression. Less urgent than in youth, perhaps, but more present, more connected. There was a deep intimacy in knowing and being known by someone who understood the limitations and beauties of an older body, who didn't expect perfection, who found eroticism in shared vulnerability. Sex at 70 is like a fine vintage wine, Gabriel commented once, lying next to me after making love. Less intense at first glance, perhaps, but with nuances and depths that only time can create. In this new phase, my relationship with money also changed. The installments from the settlement with Michael kept arriving punctually, and each monthly deposit was like a small reminder of the past. Initially, I checked the account obsessively, fearing the payments would stop, that Michael would find some loophole to escape his obligations. But over time, that worry diminished. Gabriel and I established a financial system that reflected our shared values. We kept separate accounts for personal expenses and previous savings, but created a joint account for household expenses. We both contributed proportionally to our income, and all major decisions were discussed openly. It was a practical, respectful arrangement without the power plays that often involve money in relationships. "It is funny," I commented to him one afternoon as we organized financial documents. "I spent my life saving to ensure old age, and now that I am here, I discovered that true security doesn't come just from money, but from the connections we build." Although a good retirement plan certainly helps, Gabriel added pragmatically, making me smile. The issue of Michael remained like an occasional shadow on our happiness. Gabriel never pressed the subject, but was always willing to listen when I felt the need to talk about my son, about the pain of loss, about the confusion I still felt trying to reconcile the boy I had raised with the man who had betrayed me. "Sometimes I wonder if I should try to contact him," I confessed one night as we watched the rain through the window. "Not to go back to how it was, that would be impossible. But just to, I don't know, close a circle, maybe." Gabriel considered my words carefully before answering. "What do you hope to achieve with that? Forgiveness, explanations, reconciliation?" The question made me reflect. What did I really want from Michael after everything that had happened? "I think I want to understand," I replied finally. "I want to know how my son, whom I thought I had raised with values of honesty and respect, could do what he did. Was there something I didn't see? Something I could have done differently?" Gabriel took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, a gesture that had become as familiar as my own breathing. "Grace, you know some questions don't have satisfying answers, right? Sometimes people make terrible decisions for reasons they don't even fully understand themselves." "I know," I sighed, "but still, it is hard not to wonder." I considered the possibility of writing a letter to Michael. Not accusatory, not demanding anything, just opening a channel for possible communication. I even drafted a few versions, but never sent them. Something told me the silence between us was, for now, necessary. Maybe there were cures that only time could provide, distances that needed to be maintained before any approach was possible. Meanwhile, our life continued. Gabriel kept giving occasional lectures as a guest professor and coordinating a study group on Mexican history. I expanded my financial literacy program for seniors, now including specific workshops on protection against fraud and financial abuse. Together, we began planning small trips. First, weekend getaways to nearby historic towns. Then, more ambitious plans to visit the Riviera Maya, a dream I had postponed for decades. "We are not going to let age limit us," Gabriel insisted as we studied maps and itineraries. "We can go slower, need more breaks, but we can still explore. We can still marvel." Our first big trip together was to Tulum and the surrounding area. Gabriel, with his background in history, transformed every walk into a fascinating lesson on colonization, cultural influences, and social struggles that had shaped that region. I, with my new interest in photography, documented everything: the colonial architecture, the colorful markets, the stunning beaches, the wrinkled faces of local fishermen telling stories of the sea. One particularly magical afternoon, sitting on a deserted beach, watching the sunset, Gabriel took my hand and said something that would forever be etched in my memory. "Do you know what I love most about the two of us, Grace? That we are not just surviving old age, we are thriving in it. We are creating a life that is rich and meaningful, not despite our age, but because of it." His words captured exactly what I felt. It wasn't a denial of old age, a desperate attempt to imitate youth, but a celebration of the privilege of aging, of reaching an age where wisdom replaces impetuosity, where appreciation replaces acquisition, where the quality of time matters more than its quantity. "I wish more people understood that," I replied, watching the horizon turn pink and orange. "That old age is not a slippery slope to the end, but a mountain from which you can see further and with greater clarity." Upon returning to the city, we found unexpected correspondence waiting for me. A letter with the letterhead of the law firm representing Michael. My heart raced as I opened the envelope, fearing some new legal complication. Instead, I found a brief note. "Dear Mrs. Grace Davis, we inform you that your son, Michael Davis, has requested that we transfer the remaining value of the established settlement, thus fully settling the debt. The transfer has already been made to your bank account. Additionally, Mr. Davis has asked that we include the attached envelope of a personal nature. Sincerely, Dr. Morris Peterson." Inside the larger envelope was a smaller one, with my name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "Mom, I am paying the rest of what I owe you. Not because I have the money easily available. I don't. But because I need to close this chapter of my life. Sarah and I separated 6 months ago. She left me for someone with more resources. Ironic, right? In the process, I discovered many lies she told, many manipulations I didn't realize at the time. That does not absolve me of guilt for what we did to you. I was an adult, I made my own decisions, and they were terrible. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I am trying to rebuild my life on more solid foundations. I took out a loan to pay off my debt to you because I no longer want this shadow over us. I heard you are living with someone. I hope you are happy. It wasn't a request for reconciliation or even a direct plea for forgiveness. It was something more complex, an acknowledgement, however partial, of the mistake, an attempt to close a painful story, perhaps a first tiny step towards some kind of healing. I showed the letter to Gabriel, who read it carefully. "What do you think?" I asked him, unsure how to feel. "It seems like the beginning of a reflection," he replied thoughtfully. "Not a complete reflection, not yet, but a beginning. At least he is taking part of the responsibility, even if he still deflects another part onto Sarah." Should I answer? That is only for you to decide, Grace. There is no right answer here. I spent days considering whether I should reply. What would I say? How would I find the balance between honesty and compassion? Finally, I sat at the kitchen table and drafted a simple response. Michael, I received your letter and the final payment. I thank you for closing this financial matter between us. I am sorry for your divorce. Regardless of the circumstances, I know separations are painful. Yes, I am living with Gabriel, a retired university professor. I found a happiness I didn't expect at this stage of life. You are right to seek to rebuild your life on more solid foundations. We all make mistakes, some more serious than others. The important thing is to learn from them. If one day you feel you are ready for an honest conversation without resentment, my door will be open. No rush, no pressure. Grace. I deliberately signed Grace, not Mom. Not because I had stopped being his mother, but because any reconstruction of our relationship would need to start from a new place, a more balanced place, where I wasn't just a resource to be exploited, but a complete person, with boundaries and dignity. I sent the letter without great expectations. It was a seed planted in uncertain soil, which might germinate at some future time or remain dormant forever. Either way, I felt a lightness after dropping it in the mail, as if I had released something I was still holding inside me. Some last invisible thread of hope or pain that needed to be cut so I could move forward completely. It is not a closure, I explained to Gabriel that night as we shared a glass of wine on the balcony. It is more like leaving a door ajar. He can choose to walk through it or not, but the decision is now his. Gabriel nodded, understanding as always. And are you at peace with that? With whatever decision he makes? I reflected on the question, feeling the wine warm my throat and the night air cool my face. I am at peace with myself, I replied finally, with my choices, with my path, and that is what matters in the end. He smiled, touching his glass to mine in a silent toast to the truth of those words. In the following months, I maintained occasional contact with Michael, emails, a few calls, a second meeting when he came to the city again. It wasn't the close relationship we had before, but neither was it the painful abyss that had opened between us. It was something new, something under construction, with healthier foundations and more realistic expectations. Gabriel, always attentive and generous, supported this process of gradual reconnection without ever showing jealousy or resentment. When I mentioned that to him, admiring his emotional security, he replied with his characteristic quiet wisdom. Grace, at 77, I understand that the human heart is not a limited space where one love competes with another. It is an infinitely expandable territory. Your bond with Michael, whatever form it finally takes, does not diminish in any way what we have. In fact, if it brings more peace to your heart, it will only enrich our life together. And he was right. As the old wound began to truly heal, I felt an expansion in my capacity to be present, to fully appreciate the life we were building together. On our 4th anniversary of living together, Gabriel surprised me with an unexpected gift. A small puppy, a mix of various breeds rescued from a shelter. He is not a replacement for Kafka, he explained, as the puppy explored our apartment with clumsy enthusiasm. But I thought our home could benefit from new energy. Besides, taking care of another living being keeps us committed to the future. We named the dog Angelo, inspired by the angel messenger, a name that seemed appropriate for a being who had entered our lives, bringing renewed joy. Angelo, with his boundless energy and insatiable curiosity, forced us to maintain an active routine, to walk daily through the neighborhood, to interact with other pet owners in local parks. He is keeping us young, Gabriel frequently observed, as Angelo dragged him enthusiastically down the sidewalk during our morning walks. As we approached 80, Gabriel and I began discussing the future of Project Violet. It was clear that our energy and capacity to manage it daily were limited, but we wanted to ensure the work continued. We need to institutionalize the project, suggested Gabriel. Transform it into something that doesn't depend just on us. With the help of Richard, who still assisted us in legal matters, we transformed Project Violet into an officially registered nonprofit organization. We established a board of directors composed of younger professionals committed to the cause, including Jessica, my former student who now held a senior management position at her bank. In an emotional ceremony, I officially passed the presidency of the project to Jessica, keeping consultative positions on the board for myself and Gabriel. This is not an end, but an evolution, I declared in my small speech during the ceremony. The work of protecting the elderly against financial abuse is bigger than any individual. We are just passing the baton to capable hands to carry this vision forward. The transition was bittersweet, the inevitable acknowledgement of our physical limitations, but also the celebration of the legacy we were leaving, something that would continue to benefit others long after we were no longer here. One quiet afternoon, a few weeks after the ceremony, Gabriel and I were sitting on our balcony, with Angelo asleep at our feet, watching the sunset paint the city sky with shades of orange and pink. My violets bloomed abundantly in carefully arranged pots, including that special plant, the oldest one, which had recovered so surprisingly years ago. "What are you thinking?" asked Gabriel, noticing my contemplative silence. "I am thinking about how unpredictable life is," I replied, an echo of a conversation we had had years before. How? At 78, after losing my husband, being betrayed by my son, almost losing everything I had built, I found a new form of happiness I could never have imagined. Gabriel took my hand, his fingers intertwined with mine, a gesture so familiar now that it seemed like a natural extension of myself. "Do you know what I learned from you, Grace? That resilience is not just about surviving life's storms, but about continuing to dance in the rain." I smiled, leaning on his shoulder as we watched the last ray of sun disappear on the horizon. In all my life as a teacher, I had never found such a perfect definition for what we had built together. Not just a stoic survival in the face of adversity, but a stubborn and deliberate celebration of life, with all its complexities, pains, and unexpected beauties. Michael's betrayal had been the deepest wound of my life, the moment when everything I believed about family and trust had been violently questioned. But paradoxically, it had also been the catalyst for this new existence, a life where I finally belonged to myself completely, where I had found a mature love based on mutual respect, where I had created something meaningful to help others facing similar situations. The city lights began to turn on around us, dotting the growing darkness with small artificial constellations. Angelo woke up, stretched long, and came to rest his head on my lap, asking for pets. "I am grateful," I said finally, the words simple but charged with meaning. "For what specifically?" asked Gabriel, his voice soft in the twilight. "For everything. For what was lost and for what was found. For the wounds that forced me to grow, and for the joys that came when I least expected them. For you. For us. For this life we built from the ashes of other lives." Gabriel kissed my forehead gently, his touch communicating more than words ever could. "And that life continues," he replied simply. "Tomorrow and even after that. As long as we are here, we keep dancing." And so we did. Two elderly people in love dancing slowly on the balcony under the stars, with a curious dog circling our feet and Violet silently witnessing our impromptu celebration of life. A life that, against all odds, had bloomed again when everything seemed lost. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen because in it there is a twist you have never seen before. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Grandma's Revenge Tales and leave your comments saying what you thought of my experience. Your opinion is very important to me.